So this is our lovely model, Nicole. She has a natural level 7 with lots of warmth. And the reason I'm starting with the entire section in my hand, I'm holding the entire underneath section, is that I'm placing most of my emphasis here through the ends of her hair. But also, I want to maintain quite a bit of depth through that underneath root area, where sometimes I would go in and I would kind of highlight right at that root area to detail out her hairline. So, what I'm actually doing is maintaining depth throughout the underneath so that all of the ribbons of color that we are going to be painting later on have something to sit on top of. So I want our gaze and our eyes to immediately go down through the lengths of her hair, and I want to maintain that depth again on the underneath of her hair towards her roots so that all of those ribbons of color will really stand out and really pop. I pick up just enough on the edge of my brush and I start in that mid shaft again, where I want to make sure there's a nice heavy amount of product to be able to blend upwards with and also blend downwards with. So when I'm painting in points, I'm working with just the tips of those bristles. And then when I'm blending it down, I'm working with more of the flat of the brush. So see how I'm pulling that low light out, placing it down, analyzing it, grabbing the piece that I want to paint, and then deciding where to start from there. Making sure that I have a very organized line of product on my brush when I go to apply it in these single points. And I'm wanting to lift past the level that she has on those ends. I'm wanting her to be almost a level 10 on those ends. And after I apply my cotton, I take another section with 2 diagonal backs, still working my way up. So as you're painting through, you're really making sure that the things that I'm focusing the most on is, first of all, the tension within that section. So as I'm painting, you can see that the tension gets tighter. I can physically take out the low light behind it and then think about the next section that I'm going to paint. So just like I said, sometimes we get so focused on what we're painting that we forget about what we're not painting. So just making sure that you're not painting 2 points right next to each other, because what that's going to be is just one large streak of color where you might feel like you need to go in and actually soften it later with your toner. So now I'm getting just to her high recession, and there I am mapping it out again. I can see, okay, this is where I need to place this highlight. And I did take out that little fine hair in front of this highlight right here, in front of this painted piece, because the hair was a little bit more fragile and it looked like it would be better served as a low light, so that I'm not painting this formula that's stronger on that piece, which, by the way, this formula is Free Lights with 30 volume. So 30 volume developer is going to give me enough lift to still have a little bit of that warmth, but lots and lots of brightness and pop through those ends. But I think if you get really, really creative with some of your sectioning, sometimes that's when it gets hard to space out those highlights and lowlights right where you want them. So I applied some more cotton and just throwing it on there to make sure that it's just keeping me nice and organized and off of my section below it. So I'm changing up my painting pattern just a little bit, because that's kind of technically almost the bang section there, and I'm wanting lots of boldness through the ends of her hair. So the lower that you paint your painting pattern on that mid shaft where you get really thick with your product, the more natural it's going to be, the more low light you're leaving. But the higher up that you saturate that mid area, you're going to have a lot more pop of color closer to the scalp. And just like how I did in the back crown area, I'm allowing there to be more ribbons of color in this area as well, as a little bit more brightness, so that she just feels like she has more dynamic color and more impact in those areas. So you can see that I'm just really gently going through, applying the product, gently stretching it up, gently stretching it down. And really the key is how you're pressing with those fingers. So see how I use my thumb and my fingers underneath to just really gently press the product through, press the product through, and I keep working it through. So I'm painting as I grab that section, I'm looking at where the hair naturally lifts up a little higher so you can see where I'm painting those points. And it's really this section that's telling me what painting pattern to put on it because I can see what's naturally kind of lifting up. You know, I can see what's underneath, that there's a little bit of a low light, and you can see just how saturated and how high up I painted those mids in that section that I was just in. So I'm also looking at, if you can see on the other side that I've already completed, on the right side of her head, you can see where those highlights hit her middle part. So you see wherever it's painted on the other side, I'm going just where the low light's painted and painting that on the opposite side. She's gonna have these intense pops of color that almost look a little bit too intense, where what we're going for is more of that kind of ribbons of color, very soft at the root, getting, you know, bolder and more blonde towards her ends. So you're considering the underneath and painting it not exactly where it's painted on the underneath. And now you're also considering what's painted on the other side of that parting and staggering that out. So the way that I section out the hairline is I stay underneath that high recession for the side. And when I hold out the section of hair, I'm painting based on where those natural points are in her hairline. And then right at that, right below her high recession, you can see there's like that other natural point that just kind of comes out, just highlighting that, and then just above it. So when you paint a hairline, it really will tell you where to select those points. And sometimes people will go in and you can paint the entire hairline flat, but I really like incorporating depth through the sides here to really make the top money piece pop. And then when I'm pulling it through the ends of the hair, I'm still really incorporating tons and tons and tons of brightness. But like I said, you always want to address everything while you're working, like the little globs of color and little things. You don't want to leave anything that could potentially change or hurt your color. And again, painting, making sure that I'm painting right at her widow's peak, then leaving out the amount of low light that I want. If I did want to paint those baby hairs, I would probably do that at the bowl later on if I felt like I wanted to melt them away or incorporate them at all. But because I'm using a higher strength developer, I'm just gonna let them fall out of the section and paint them later. So you definitely want to make sure that you're saturating there the most and that your points are nice and thick with product, that the mids are really, really blended and beautiful. So I use my fingers and the pressure between my fingers to make sure that that blend is really, really good. So when you hold it all in your hand at once, you can see exactly where those highlights want to already live. And this is pretty much the only place where I want both of those highlights to meet each other. And it's at her widow's peak because that is my area of most brightness where I want a really intense pop of color, right? Is just that little money piece at her widow's peak. So my painting pattern matches up exactly perfectly to the painting pattern on the opposite side, which is her widow's peak. You can see how I only disappeared really when I was closer to her hairline, starting to paint a little bit more of the V's. And now I'm doing 3 points and sometimes 4 points around her hairline. And then also that hairline through the underneath. The hairline through the underneath, remember there was lots of kind of points going up through that first diagonal back section with heavy, heavy saturation through the ends of that underneath. So now that she's all nice and covered and the cotton is really just placed to keep everything separate and to keep those painting patterns organized. And then from mids through ends, I stretch through 9-stroke 5-9, which is a beautiful blush champagne tone.